So the talk that I was going to give is based on this this text called the Hsin Hsin Ming, or the Heart Mind of Sosan. Sosan was a lineage holder in our lineage of the Sokuzan tradition, and this is a great poem. And there's one line in it that I was going to talk a little bit about. There's a lot of lines here. It's to set up what you like against what you dislike is a disease of the mind. So another way of saying that is picking and choosing is a disease of the mind. We're not saying that you shouldn't make some decisions about something, but sometimes we tighten down our mind in our life about trying to make the right choice, trying to make sure that we make the right selection, that we don't go the wrong way, that we don't make any mistakes. And we're even taught this. Our culture provides this to us all the time. In school, there's just an intense propaganda around this all the time. So what's being said here is, when we say this is a disease of the mind, we're not saying that you can't do some selecting or looking at something and deciding on this against that. It's when that gets really ramped up and we start to use it in our life in such a way that we just drive ourselves crazy, not to mention our relatives, our family and friends. So picking and choosing, selecting one thing over another, looking at another way that I like to say this is being perplexed by forks in the road. We think that there are right and wrong choices. This is a misunderstanding. And this is not a misunderstanding based on being that relative truth doesn't have something about it that is correct. It's just that we tend to drive ourselves crazy with this. And so what I'm saying is, through the sitting practice of meditation, one can slowly or speedily move into a realm or into an area of your consciousness where you're not grasping at something, you're not rejecting anything, and you're not shutting down on anything. In Buddhism, this is called the three poisons: passion, grasping at something, grabbing at something, pulling at something, wanting something to be a different way, wanting to have more of something, or aggression, wanting to get rid of something, wanting to kill it, wanting to wipe it out. There's two of them, pushing and pulling. What's the third one? Ignoring, shutting down, closing down. Look at it, look in your life, look in the last 20 minutes, look in the last 20 weeks, whatever it may be, and look at the way in which you give yourself a hard time, the way in which you think that there's a right thing to pull on, and a right thing to stop, and a right thing to start, and a right thing to ramp up, and a right thing to... We just give ourselves such a hard time with this. Most of our time is spent picking and choosing, deciding, evaluating, judging, accepting, rejecting, All at the same time having a little voice in the background saying, yeah, you're about to get it. No, that's not going to work. Don't do this. Yes, do that. No, you shouldn't have done that. That was incorrect. Have you noticed? How do I know about that? I just about drove myself insane doing that. Of course, now I'm completely sane. It's not funny. And what would sanity be? Let's talk about that. Sanity is no more warfare with anything. None. No more warfare. This doesn't mean that if somebody pushes on you, you might not push them back. I'm not talking about something that's very simple. I'm talking about that intense kind of agenda about I'm right and I'm going to teach that person a lesson. However this may show up, it can show up so many different ways in our life. No more warfare. In other words, what is leading what comes out in front of your thinking process in your life is your awareness. Comes out. You start to lead your life with your awareness, out of your clarity around what is happening. not about who's right, who's wrong, what will people think, what will I think about what people think. What will I think about what people think that I'm thinking about what they think? We do that. We actually do that. We think about what they're thinking, and then we guess about what they're thinking about what we're thinking about. We even demonstrate this. We'll be talking to someone and say, well, you know, I don't want you to think that I think that you're a bad thinker. Or that I don't want you to think that I think that what you think is not the way that I thought you should be thinking. Picking on him particularly because he's so confused. So leading with awareness, how do you lead with your awareness? Strengthen it. You can't just suddenly decide, well, you know, what that old guy's saying may work. I think I'm going to start leading with my awareness. Well, you might find this is very, very difficult to do, because usually what happens is you get an imposter called the thinking process. And we keep trying to do what? Figure it out, figure it out, figure it out. It's practically a knee-jerk reaction to try to figure things out. And so what's being suggested is knock that off. How do you do that? You have to bring enough awareness up there to see the way in which you keep going in circles. We go in circles and go, and this is, we get so dizzy after a while, and then what do we want to do? We want to stop all that dizziness. We want to just slow down, and then we might take drugs. We might binge on Netflix. You know, something that's not too bad. Of course, it depends on what you binge on, because some of those things will hurt you. You have to check with me and find out what it's okay to binge with. I'll tell you. So picking and choosing, thinking if there's a right and wrong. A right and wrong is completely relative all the time. You might have heard this before, but now's your time to ask questions about of someone who is saying this, who does not have an opinion about it. Of course, that's just my opinion. There isn't any right or wrong. There is no correct or incorrect. Everything is always relatively arisen, and all evidence is partial. This is why things like the penal system, or the Department of Corrections and all that, and the whole system of laws is just completely childish. Thinking that actually someone actually is to blame for something else. A little bit, but not to the degree that we need to take someone and murder them or put them in a box for 30 years. You wouldn't do that necessarily with your child. Yes? Kevin?
Is it incorrect to think that something we do is correct?
That's both correct and incorrect. And you should ask more if you're unclear. Don't you get cute or I'll come over and hit you. Sheldon.
If there's no correct or incorrect, why does math seem to work so well?
What is what?
Math. Why does math seem to work so well?
Does math work well?
Sometimes, yeah.
So why do you have any problems then? We'll just use math.
I'm just kidding. I do as much as I can.
Do you? Just because it works well. Yeah, you sit down and do long division, that feels really good. How many of you know how to do long division? There's a reason they call it long. It's long. It's like the continent of South America. You know, it's like the top part with the numbers, and then there's a number off to one side that's the head dude. And then there's all those numbers that go down like this, and there's about 3 or 4 levels down there. That's where you screw it up and you transpose numbers down. The whole thing is wrong. It's a terrible thing to subject 4th graders to. Don't you think? Yes, sir.
How do we work with our impulse to jump to conclusions of right and wrong?
I think that's a good question. And the way The way I understand that is to just, as first of all, train your awareness to see clearly, so that you can see the way the impulse works, so that you can see so clearly. Your awareness is so strong that when that impulse comes up, you see that that's coming out of fear. It's out of a fear of not knowing, and the fear of not knowing is directly connected to what? Ego, self-centeredness. There is no solid self here. Find that out. If you can find out that you're here, your body's here, your mind is here, the six sense fields are here, they're all operating. We're able to smell, able to taste, able to hear, able to see. So all that is running, and what happens is that all gets together and says me. And then we start to get defensive or paranoid. But there isn't anyone. There's no solid being. Who you are cannot be destroyed. You are someone, but who you are can't be destroyed. Why can't it be destroyed? Because it hasn't been created. What's been created is the body-mind comes into existence and passes out of existence. But who you are doesn't go anywhere. Find out. Find that out for yourself. You do nothing else with your life other than get a degree in sociology. Find out who you are. Don't let another year go by without spending time. Find out who this is. It may not be through meditation or Buddhism. It may be through hiking in the Adirondacks. I don't know. Yes.
How is believing that we're right both correct and incorrect?
Well, it's correct in that there's probably a relative truth to it that holds up and makes sense. And it's like math, 2 and 2 equal starts with an F. We can come up with some answers, some responses that someone else will validate for us. Yeah, that's right. A. Get an A. But we're incorrect in that it's always partial. That it's not the complete truth. Even physics, even particle physicists when they go down deep into matter, don't find what they thought was there in the first place. They don't find. If you read a little bit of that, even the layman's information on that about string theory and so on, it's just quite amazing that there is no solid thing at the basis of everything. Now, there are things on the way down, stair steps, and then there's wood, there are nails, and then there's mice under the steps. You want me to keep going? But if you go all the way down, eventually you get the molecules and atoms and then the space between them. And then when we look, we see the space between atoms is like incredibly, there's an atom here and there's an atom there and there's this incredible amount of space, just like looking out into the sky. So find out who, take a look, sit down. This is something you can do. This is an ancient path, goes back 2,500 years. It's not the only way, but it's one of the few ways that you can actually find out who you are. This is not a belief system. I have nothing to peddle. I have nothing to sell. I'm only here for there's a couple other reasons, but I'm not going to tell you those. One is to make a lot of money. Filthy rich. But I'm here because my teacher helped me understand something. My teachers helped me understand something about the nature of this and the nature of this world. And I would like to share that with you if you're ready to hear it. And if you're not, I have nothing to sell. I totally respect your right and your freedom to go the other way and keep going the other way for the next 20 lifetimes. I'll meet you eventually. If you're in this room now, you're going to see me again. You'll see this teaching again. It might not be in this lifetime. But you really blew it when you came in this door. Thought you were going to continue to be a self-centered little ego who was going to get ahead and be a great tennis champion. Yes.
Does the transparency of ego occur gradually from our apparent solid perception of ego?
Again?
Does it occur gradually? Does the transparency of ego, does it occur gradually, a little bit at a time?
I think both. Some of it is very fast. Some of it is a big flash, and then it kind of goes away. In the Zen tradition, this is called Kensho. It's just insight into your true nature. You suddenly have a big flash of who you actually are, and you start to stare reality in the face, and that can be quite a shock. But then that goes away, and you're back to sitting and being bored again. Yes?
So I've always been curious since Onya told us a little bit about your Kensho experience, but could you explain a little bit about it? Like
About
your
what?
experience? She told us the story of you were on the cow and you fell off the back of the cow.
You told them about the cow?
I haven't even heard that story. Come on.
Yeah.
Give us
Well, I
a
was on this cow. And the cow was, how'd that go?
You had a bell.
That cow had a bell, bang, bong, bong.
What were you doing on a cow?
I was going to market.
Buy a fat pig?
Buy fat pig. Jiggity jig.
Wasn't it a donkey?
Huh?
Wasn't it
It
a
was
donkey?
Kate.
It was a donkey,
Oh.
yeah.
How
Well,
many versions of this story are there?
It was a lamb.
it was a donkey, yeah. Then what happened?
That's what we wonder.
Huh?
That's what we're asking.
Something ran out in front of the donkey and spooked it.
No, I didn't.
Oh.
Go ahead. In 1967, I think it was, before I even met my teacher, before I started meditating, I was reading a lot. I was reading about Buddhism. I was reading about anything I could get my hands on about this kind of practice. I was, 25, maybe 26, and actually I was older than that. Yeah, I was about 26, and I was riding on a burro in about 10, 15 miles north of here, out in the country, where I lived on a farm with my wife and kids. And I was going along reading, I was sitting in the back of this burro with no saddle, and I had a book in my hand, and the book was by Alan Watts. It was called The Book on the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are. The Book on the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are. It's a cowbell. So, anyway, I was riding along, and I was kind of contemplating what was being said, and I had the book kind of down on the withers of the donkey, and I'm just kind of contemplating this, and I look, and there's a rustle in the bushes over here, and my head turns, and I could see her head turn at the same time towards it. And then a rabbit ran right directly out and right between her legs. And I thought, since she looked at it, she saw it was just a rabbit. I saw it was just a rabbit. I didn't care, but she was afraid of rabbits. She didn't tell me that before we took off. And she started bucking, and I started going up in the air with my feet hitting down on my tailbone on her rump. I hit about 3 times, right centered on there, and then I went off the back and hit right on my back. Took the wind down, and then when that happened, my consciousness disengaged from my body, or at least that was my experience, and I was, and I could see what I could see, for lack of a better word, reality. I could see that I was not a solid being in a body, that I was not that I was different than that I was more than that. And it was very, very emotional for me. It was extremely emotional. Kind of like an orgasm without not really being an orgasm. It's kind of a spiritual organism. So anyway, it was really powerful, and when I got up, and I was so excited about this, that and Kate was running down the road, going. The donkey was running home because she knew exactly what road to go down to go right back to the barn, and had no problem finding the barn. And I was so excited I couldn't hardly stand it. I thought I was going to pee my pants. I was jumping up and down, and I had the blanket that was over her that I was sitting on, if there wasn't a saddle, and I took that and started jumping up and down and waving it around. my head, and whooping and hollering and probably yelling. So that was that what you want to hear about?
Yeah.
Now you want to hear about the cow. Anyway, it was just a really strong experience of seeing something different than everyday stuff. And it faded out. It stayed there for a few hours, and it slowly started to fade away. I went and told my wife about it, and she was at the kitchen sink, and I don't know what I said, but I said this, and she went, yeah, okay. Wow, that's something. She was a Capricorn, so very practical. But
So what's to be learned from a Kensho experience?
not much, other than the main thing you learn from Kensho is nothing lasts. It's a wonderful, amazing feeling. It just goes. It's like any really great feeling, any experience. How do you know something is an experience? This is the one I'm always doing. There's an experience. Where is it now? Gone. It's in your memory. Or is it? The very interesting, the very obvious things we're working with the sixth sense fields and their objects all the time. Watch those, watch what moves in those and find out what doesn't move. See if you can find out what doesn't move. Get back to me, let me see what it is. What? Yes, sir.
Space. Spaces.
That would be a way of saying it, yeah. You like space, like a blue sky. Yes, sir.
Does awareness not move?
What's your experience?
I don't know yet.
Boy, that's a good answer. I like that answer. Keep answering all your questions that way from now on. Any time somebody's just say, I don't know yet. I shouldn't be picking on you, Daniel. I'm sorry, it's the first time he's been here. Other questions? Sir?
When we're getting back to you're talking about
No.
that when we think we're right, there's a relative aspect to it that may be true, and that side is so seductive because
It is.
you get something out of it. How do you begin to switch your allegiance out of that where it feels good and you're receiving something to not really buying the right or wrong?
So at some point, as we go along, we look at this and we start to get some insight into things are not what we thought they were, and we see that though people have this kind of a proof, or relative proof that something is a certain way, still, and the one I often use is someone who's been locked up, who's committed a crime. We don't really, it's practically impossible to go back and find the causes and the conditions that led up to that person, say, committing a crime or being, as they say, guilty of something, because we don't know how they were raised, how they were treated when they were young. Just in this lifetime, all the things that get together to make it difficult for a person to just live in a sane, uplifted way. Who knows why one person is born in a family where the mother and father are very supportive and kind and helpful and are really tuned into you as a young person, trying to help you, and why someone else, the parents are drug addicts, and the young person is left on their own to join a gang or whatever, but this happens. But we see it, those of us who, some of the practice residents and monks here go into prisons, teach people who are in prison, and one of the interesting things that you discover, that I've discovered from going into prisons, is the only difference is those people are in prison, but they're just people. They're just in there, and the situation in their life went awry at some point, and they find themselves all of a sudden locked up for 20 years for something, just causes and conditions came together and put them in that situation. And rather than our society, because our society is primitive, rather than looking at this and saying, okay, let's try to see what happened here, we are so anxious to blame. because it gives us a sense of completion, or a sense of, okay, we've got that covered, now they were at fault. But really, the Buddhist teaching is no praise, no blame, that no one can really be blamed for anything fundamentally. You can't find the first cause of anything. And so that's why when I gave the meditation instruction earlier, I said, there's nothing to correct. So it's my way of encouraging you to stop picking and choosing between your thought patterns, between your ideas and so on, and slowly encourage the awareness to come to the fore and come out in front of the thinking process, so you can see, so your choices, if you want to call them that, are based on awareness, not on thinking process. Thinking process, evaluating, I don't care how good the math is. It's cold and dry, and it won't take into consideration all the things that are floating above the long division.
How do you work with blame?
Yeah. So Chazon's asking, how do you work with blame? And I've given several talks on that, and saying it just seems to be necessary to bring as much awareness as you can to it, and don't try to stop the blaming, because then it goes underground. But to actually take responsibility, or be responsible for your tendency to want to blame someone for how you're feeling. Someone does this or does that, and we have a reaction to it. It seems the only way we can work with that, to respond to your question maybe a little more closely, is train the mind to see more clearly, so that the awareness is so powerful that it starts to see that there is no blame. And what happens there before that probably comes about, that awareness starts to look back at the blamer. So it's hard to actually look at that, but if the awareness is really strong, we start to look at the identity of the one who blames, the same way the one who gives credit, or so on. And this is a kind of self-centeredness, but it seems to be necessary to bring the awareness there to see that there is not a solid identity there. It's not that there isn't something there, but it's not a solid identity. Identity is discontinuous. The ego itself is constantly changing into something else. If I were to, it's an example I sometimes use, if I compliment you, even if I'm joking, if I compliment you, it will feel good. Even if I'm acting. If I criticize you, even if I'm acting and pretending, it won't feel so good. And it's just, if the identity was really strong, it was really just present, it was not discontinuous, you wouldn't be affected by other people's opinions. Particularly, maybe a little bit, but you wouldn't. Sometimes we're really, really affected by, especially the opinions of people we're really close to, or people that have raised us, our mother and father, close relationships, friends, enemies for that matter.
Sometimes it's really hard not to continue telling the relative story about someone who did wrong to you.
Yeah.
How do you break that pattern?
Well, start by seeing that it's a pattern. Go slow. See that there's a pattern to that kind of activity. But the fundamental insight has to come through seeing that there's been a mistaken identity. The primary mistaken identity is thinking that you are someone. And the other mistaken identity is to think that everybody else is just that someone else. This is the primary picking and choosing. This is the primary issue and the problem. If we really see what this is and who we are, we have no more enemies ever, anywhere. I'm not saying that if somebody doesn't come to rob your house, that you suddenly are going to shower them with kisses. I'm not going the other way, that we're some kind of idiot. But you have an understanding about what that person is probably going through, in order to even put them in the position of wanting to rob your house. So there's a little bit of, there's some kind of understanding, sometimes called compassion, for people. I mean, it's easy to have compassion for people who are, who have been wronged, but how about compassion for the people who are causing the problems? How about that kind of deep understanding and deep caring, which doesn't mean being manipulated by people. It doesn't mean being at the mercy of someone else's agenda just because you're feeling sympathy with their plight. Sheldon.
What stops that concept of no separation? What stops that from working by thinking it, by having some idea that you know it because you just told me?
What's the question?
Why doesn't that actually work?
It does work.
So we could just sit around and keep thinking about how we're not separate, and eventually that'll be the case for us.
I didn't say that.
I know.
What did I say?
You said it does work.
I lied. It doesn't work. The important thing seems to be is to train your mind, strengthen the awareness that just sees, so that no matter what starts to arise in that awareness is not pushed away, not grasped, and not ignored. Those are the three. Those are the three ways we work with our life. Whether you're a Buddhist or whether you're a meditator or whether you have any interest in this at all, you look at the way in which you push on some things, pull on other things, and shut down on other things. Those are the three ways we keep ourselves spinning around in this crazy world we call samsara, this constant wheel of life and death, life and death, life and death. So it seems to be necessary to see that, and when we begin to have a sense of equanimity there, a balance where we're through fighting with things, then that awareness starts to sink in so that we see that there's no one here to actually observe that. It's a powerful insight. And it's not an experience that comes and goes. It's not something that you, like the experience I have of falling off the cow with a donkey. The experience I had there was something that came, it was really astonishing, I had this great experience, and then it went away. And then I would think about it every now and then, wonder, how can I get that back? Do I want that back? Should I go get another cow? But what the actual understanding, if it occurs, or if you have an experience of seeing what it is that I'm endeavoring to point to here is no self, that who you are is not solid, then that is not an experience. That is not something that you experience no self and then it goes away. That's exactly what the experiences do. Something that is an experience happens, it's gone. Realization of what I'm referring to can't leave because it has not come. And why hasn't it come? How hasn't it come? Because when you realize it, you realize it's always been there. You've been ignoring your own Buddha nature, your own awakened nature, your own sanity. You've been shutting it down, shutting it down, shutting it down.
So what is it that recognizes that Buddha nature?
Buddha nature recognizes it. Wisdom recognizes it. When I say I have to have some kind of a word, so that's the word I'm choosing to use, is wisdom. Wisdom actually sees that. There's not a person, an identity that sees it. And if this is happening, you won't mind what happens to you. You will not be particularly concerned about your experiences. If bad things happen, fine. Good things happen, fine. Neutral things happen, fine. No longer having an experience and thinking, I shouldn't be having that. Or having an experience and thinking, why am I having this? laughing because that's funny. Yes.
What is being pointed at when Chogyam Trungpa speaks of basic goodness?
So Chogyam Trungpa he's asking about Chogyam Trungpa, who was my Tibetan, was a Tibetan Lama who was my teacher that I met back in the early 70s. And he has a book called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, which I highly recommend that you read, if you want. And one of the phrases, or one of the examples, or one of the ways in which he talks about wisdom is saying, rather than using the fancy word of wisdom, or the Sanskrit word of jnana, or prajna, he calls it basic goodness. It's just basically good. It doesn't have an opposite of basic badness. It's just basically good. So it's basic goodness is seeing that your complete experience, including the difficulty, including the abrasiveness, is basically good. If you realize that, warfare is over. No more war, no more fighting with anything, no more fighting with yourself, picking and choosing. Disease of the mind. So you are capable, when this awakening happens, and I hope that it happens for everyone here, whatever arises in the mind, I'm not objecting to it. You're not agreeing with it, and you're not shutting down on it. So it's just appearing. And what happens, since there's no longer any solid self here, there's no longer any solid other out here. So what are you doing when this happens? Need I say more? You're looking at yourself. Sheldon.
Is basic good the same thing that we're talking about when we say just this?
When I say that, yeah, yes. Yeah, it's basically good. It's just this. If you understand what this is, and you see what it is, there isn't any past or future. Past and the future is just a cheap way of working with things. Have you noticed? Think about it. You can't, the past is gone, the future never gets here. There's just this, all the time. Don't agree, don't disagree, don't look away. Just this, completely. Question? Any questions, especially from people who are new here and have never heard this talk before? Anything? No. So I made myself completely clear. Yay. All right. Well, that's a wrap.
I have one more if you have time.
Oh, let me see. Yeah, I could squeeze it in. After all, it's always now. Go ahead.
Can we use the word egolessness and choicelessness synonymously?
There's a resonance there. I mean, they're two different concepts. You can't really use them. They aren't synonymous. Egolessness has to do with the identity quality. No solid identity anywhere, and choicelessness has to do with no fork in the road. So if you really see, the way I've talked about this before, is if you take anything that looks like a fork in the road and just hold still and watch it, as you move closer and closer to that, you will see that there's only one direction you can go. One of the ways you can test this, just take anything that looks like a choice. This usually works. Anything that looks like two different things, and then draw two buttons on a piece of paper and say, this is choice A and here's choice B. And then, but tell yourself, say, okay, this is, I'm gonna move to Missouri and start a nudist colony. That's one. And the other one is I'm going to go back to school and become a fighter pilot. So, now that's a hard choice to make, I know. But put those down and then say, okay, I'm gonna push one of those buttons, but when I do, the other button disappears and I no longer can go back. No reverse. You'll find right away which one you wanna do. Because you won't be able to shut down on that one. The one you wanna do is the one you wanna do. So we're just giving ourselves a hard time over this. This path right here is choiceless. You should not become a Buddhist unless it's choiceless. You can do something else, do it. We'll see in a few lifetimes. Do something else. Become a cattle rancher. In South America, preferably. I hear they're doing a lot better down there than we are. Further questions? Yes, Lisa.
Experiences happen to this body, and,
Yes.
and it makes it seem really, really solid.
I noticed that.
How does looking at the wall help me get beyond the solidness of this body that I'm in?
Because you eventually realize that the solidity of this body is not really you. I mean, it's not separate from you, but it's not as much you as you think. What we do is we isolate into the body. We defend our body, we protect our body, we have all kinds of ideas about it. It's all over the place. You already know that, so I'm not telling anybody anything new. But who you actually are is not only this, but is everything else. And it is that so thoroughly that you're able, and when you realize that, you're able to see exactly what's happening around you. You won't be able to necessarily talk about it. You can't really hook your vocal cords up and describe what you see, but you see it, and you don't have doubts about it. But also, you're not particularly opinionated or stubborn about it. You're not going to defend anything because no more war. If you look up here and you see confidence, then that's probably your projection. If you see self-centeredness or narcissism, that's probably true because I'm really stuck on myself. Anything else from the peanut gallery? That's what they used to call the group of kids back in the 1950s, before the cow incident. Back in the 1950s, I used to watch TV and I watched something called the Howdy Doody Show. Anybody remember the Howdy Doody Show? No, you guys don't.
Yeah,
Reruns.
Huh?
Reruns.
Oh, reruns, okay. And Buffalo Bob was on there. And he always referred to the kids up in the audience as the peanut gallery. So that's why I'm doing that. That's my rationale. Thank you so much.